So, session 23, another session about data, but this is once again another session I think that's mission critical for Archicad users out there in terms of wanting to get more powerful outputs from Archicad and having a more solid understanding of how much their projects could potentially be costing them, and being able to provide that information to their clients if it's safe to do so in your jurisdiction. So I'm really fortunate to have John Hallgarth from ContraBIM here to share his insights with you today, be it this morning, early morning, or evening, or early in the morning for you, depending upon where you're watching it in the world. Second last session of the day, and I'm grateful for John and his time to be with us today. So today he's going to share with us how you can break into 5D data using a big suite of data features within Archicad around classifications, properties, and also schedules. So thanks very much, John. Take it away, mate.
All right, welcome everyone to hour 23 of the Archintensive event. It is great to be with you today. Huge thanks to Nathan for the introduction and putting together this global conference. Very excited to be here presenting on a topic that I really enjoy, which is how to break into 5D BIM with classifications, properties, and schedules. So again, my name is John Hallgarth. ContraBIM is my company. I build different Archicad tools and training programs. I also consult with Archicad firms from around the world. A lot of those consulting services these days are kind of centered on this subject of how to automate 5D estimating from Archicad to Excel is kind of the most common workflow, and yeah, it's a subject I really enjoy. And so yeah, if you feel like reaching out with any questions, then yeah, you can find me on the web at contrabim.com. I'm also on, I have a YouTube channel covering a lot of different Archicad tutorial videos as well. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram, and if you want to reach out via LinkedIn and send me a message, then I'm always happy to meet new people on there as well. So, all right, so our topic today, breaking into 5D BIM. So really we only have so much time allotted for today, about 40 minutes. So we're going to try to kind of make this a crash course on the subject. And so if you're brand new to 5D, then this will provide a solid foundation for how we can use the tools within Archicad to set up a workflow that we can then continue to build on for dialing in this workflow. But what is 5D? Well, the most simplistic way I can describe it is taking model elements and their quantities and multiplying it by a rate to determine what the cost impact will be. So this is obviously an oversimplification, but it's always good to approach 5D from a simplistic view to begin with, kind of starting from the top and working our way down. You can always add layers of complexity and details later on, but it's good to start with a simplistic viewpoint. So our agenda for today, I want to just provide a quick background on my story with 5D and talk about some of the lessons learned that have shaped my outlook on the subject. We'll then jump into the learning objectives, so the essentials for this workflow, which again are kind of built into those three components, the classifications, properties, and schedules. We'll also talk about some of the other components that are important, like building materials and how we can take this information into Excel. And then on the second half of this presentation, we will jump into some live projects and talk about how these different components all work together. So I'm very fortunate to be able to work with some awesome Archicad firms from around the world, and they've been gracious enough to allow me to use some of the projects that we've worked on and share with you how these different concepts are actually used in practice. And so, yeah, thanks to the firms for letting me share this information. The first project we'll jump into is one by Vega Architecture out of Colorado. This is a library renovation project, so it's got a demo scope and a new construction scope that we will certainly take a look at. And yeah, it's got a lot of interesting features to it. And so yeah, we'll jump into this project file and we'll poke around to see how classifications are being used, how properties are being assigned and utilized for helping elements flow into interactive schedules for further analysis. So our second project is quite different. This one is a residential design by Metrica out of Seattle. And this project is cool and interesting because we're actually deploying a 5D workflow that's taking advantage of our expression-based properties and allowing for internal cost calculations to occur directly within Archicad, which is awesome. It simplifies the process. It makes it easier to get live feedback directly while you're in the model. And so yeah, I'll look forward to showing you this project. We'll fly through it. We'll grab some different model elements, talk about the classifications and the properties that are being expressed, and also how things are being reported onto the schedules. So, all right, before we jump into the real kind of learning concepts here, just want to say thank you again for checking out the presentation. If you like this subject on 5D and you want to learn more, go to contribim.com/Archintensive. If you sign up there, I'll send you some more training content and information about the 5D tools that we've developed here at Contribim. All right, so let's start with a basic question of why do we need 5D estimating? Well, to me, there's kind of a simple answer, and it's all about trying to solve a very specific equation that really everybody or the main stakeholders in a project are interested in. And so what is the equation? Well, it's really what quantities can we include in our project at what quality, whether it's, you know, an economy quality or a luxury quality. So what are our quantities? What quality determines our ultimate cost? So yeah, this is a very simplified way of looking at this, but all these different stakeholders, you know, whether you're an owner, obviously you want the highest quality and typically as much of the quantity as you can possibly afford for your budget. So it's really important to, obviously owners, because they're either footing the bill or going to procure financing to build a project. So it's pretty obvious why they're concerned with this equation. Designers are obviously wanting to design the best project at the highest quality for the available costs. So again, it's the same equation they're trying to figure out. Builders are trying to figure out what quantities are included in the design and what the quality of the design as specified is, what it actually costs. So really all these different players have a vested interest in solving this equation and solving it as efficiently as possible. And this is really where 5D estimating can be the workflow and the process that can help enable better communication, faster analysis, and faster, more efficient ways of trying to solve this common equation. So yeah, hopefully that quick explanation helps relay why I think 5D is important. To me, this is like, it's right in the middle of everyone's you know, workflows, and if we can just tap into it, take advantage of it, then everyone else will save time, save money, and ultimately we're trying to reduce risk on a project, so you don't have to go back and redesign something once you find out that it doesn't fit into the budget. So all right, a little bit about my story. So I actually started working with Archicad back in 2008. It's actually funny, at the time it was Archicad, but it actually wasn't Archicad. It was actually called Vico Constructor. Was the first build of the software that I actually got my hands on. So at the time I was working for a large general contractor. So obviously we were more focused on how to build a project and how to extract quantities and build estimates and do the planning than we were the design. And so I'm sure that's why we started with Constructor versus Archicad 11 or Archicad 12. But obviously this build of Archicad was kind of broken off into its own software called Vico Office. And yeah, that's kind of where this tightly integrated estimating package with Archicad kind of split. So from there, though, over the years, from that version 11 and 12, there's been really some key developments along the way just built into Archicad that have really enabled us to do a lot more in the way of estimating. The addition of building materials, the addition of properties in version 20 was huge for just managing the data aspect in BIM. Classifications in 21 helped us organize properties as well as have another tool for assigning standards, and expressions in 22 allowed us to take all these different parameters and start calculating them together. So after 22, we're now really fully capable of performing a wide variety of different calculations all within Archicad. So some of the key lessons learned, really from my perspective, if you can focus most of your effort for your 5D workflow directly within Archicad versus trying to go buy other software to achieve how this is done, then I think you get a huge benefit out of it. The result is ultimately higher quality of your models, better organization of your models, and by implementing 5D, it really opens the door to all sorts of other analysis of your project. So definitely would recommend to focus on building out your workflow with Archicad first if you are using Archicad for your designs versus trying to go add other software packages, because every time you add a software package, it's just more cost obviously in software, but there's always a little bit of information loss when you start handing things over. So best to keep it all in one platform if you can. But when you do need to export, I recommend using Excel as the tool. To me, it's still the most open in terms of estimators out there. The vast majority of estimators prefer still to work in Excel. They trust it. It's kind of like a raw, easy to modify, open way of manipulating data. And one important thing that it allows us to do is kind of blend more traditional manual estimating practices with incoming model data from our Archicad project. So this is really quite crucial. So, all right, let's go a little bit deeper now into our concepts and the essentials. So again, we've been talking about these, and let's first kind of put these into context. So the way that I look at this flow here is we start on the top left here with organizing our model elements with our classifications. From there, we can then start associating model data through our properties with those elements as well. We can add quantity properties there as well and do some mapping of different design tools parameters into these common quantity parameters. Our interactive schedules come in when we need to start pulling and organizing model elements into reports. And then generally from there, that's a good point to review and condition the data within your model elements to make sure that it's right before you then export it out to another format for sharing, typically into an Excel format where we can build up specific cost sheets and summaries, and everything ultimately with the goal here is to have it flow into a total cost summary that you can then add additional markups on and build a comprehensive estimate with. So at the end of the day, our formatting for our cost summary likely will want to kind of mirror that of our original classification that we add to our model elements. And in general, this is kind of the flow for how I see all these things coming together and working. So let's go a little bit deeper into classifications. So I've already mentioned that they can be used for associating properties to our elements. We have version 2.0 for this now, which is really the way of assigning properties to elements by through the available classifications. The other primary use for classifications is to align our model elements to regional standards or specifications. There's really two different types how I look at this, one for organizing building systems and functions, and another for organizing the materials and the trades of construction that are installing those materials. So our properties, really there's like endless uses for how we can use our property manager, and we can, probably some of the most common uses are just different IDs, descriptions, and option sets. We can add different rates and factors. We can map quantities to properties, and we can start adding formulas and logic to have Archicad do the calculations for us to just make our workflows that much more automated. There are a few limitations with the expressions. We can't currently add object properties or IFC properties. And the component properties relating to building materials and surfaces, unfortunately, we can't add into the expressions just yet, but hopefully here soon that is something that will allow us to expand our 5D workflows to include those details, which I think will be super powerful. All right, interactive schedules. So this is our way of just defining a criteria so that Archicad goes into the database and extracts out the model elements that match that criteria. We then just list whatever fields we want. So fields can be just basic Archicad parameters. They can be properties. They can be classifications. They can be any type of data that we want to list. So this is super useful for just organizing our scopes of our estimate, and it allows us to do different audits to make sure things are set up right. And ultimately, the purpose of these schedules is to prepare for exporting to a format that we can then share with our teams. So we have a few different schedule types that we can set up. Element types, which are elements are great for just reporting, just what they are, just the general element. Components are great for reporting the materials within elements. So this is useful for basic structures, composite structures, and complex profiles. We also have surface schedules. So this is useful for extracting the exposed surface area of elements as well. So really there's pros and cons of each of these. With our elemental type schedules, this is the one that's easiest to work with for doing direct inputs of numbers directly into the interactive schedules. So really the element schedule is the most interactive out of all of them. The cons are it's really kind of a summary level element type only. Component schedules. So obviously for tapping into material takeoffs within composite structures and complex profiles, this is the way to do it. But there are some cons here. We can't actually input information directly into our component schedules, and there is no property exchange as we have with our elemental schedules. Same thing with the surfaces. Obviously, to get the surface listing, this is a good way to go, but we don't have any direct inputs or exchanges of properties through these schedules. So there's a few important questions that I always, ask clients or ask them to consider at least before approaching 5D. So I just wanted to lay some of these out here real quick. Number one is, what organizational structure are you going to use? So often this will determine what classification you add to your model and to your model elements. How detailed or complete do you typically model a project? So this is a question about what percentage of the estimate, when you look at 100% estimate, what percentage of the estimate can actually be driven by model elements that you create based off the discipline that you are working on? So whether you're an architect or structural engineer or MEP or civil engineer, you have to consider which disciplines are actually modeling to fulfill these 5D estimating scopes. And where to manage the unit cost data is always an important question, whether to add that directly into your model elements, or to manage that on the Excel side. So there's pros and cons of doing it both ways. If you have it available in Archicad, then you can run cost calcs in Archicad. But often estimators are going to be working and fine-tuning the numbers in Excel, so it makes sense a lot of the time to have it the option for overriding cost in Excel. So, but you can also do both at the same time. So it's there's a lot of flexibility to how these can be set up. Okay, so let's go ahead, and we are now going to be jumping into our first project sample file here. This again is the library project. We will be talking about classifications and properties. We'll take a look at those renovation filters for our demo scopes as well as the new construction. We'll obviously take a look at the interactive schedules and some of the different types for the demo versus new element-based schedules versus material-based schedules. So we'll dive into all of these here in this sample project. Again, thanks to Vega Architecture for allowing us to show this demonstration. And so yeah, let's go ahead and jump now over to Archicad. So, okay, here we are. So this is a library, and really the focus of what we are looking at today is going to be this wing right here. So on this particular project, let's kind of first just start by doing an overview of some of those critical features that we were talking about, which of course are our classifications, and after that we'll jump into our properties. So again, to reiterate, our version 2.0 classification here, you can see, is what we are associating a number of different properties with, so this is really the primary purpose, is a property association, the version 2.0. We also have a few other classifications in here. So our master format, 22 is the name on this one, is really kind of the standard here in the US for assigning material-based classifications. So this is really useful for going through and assigning different specific types of materials and trades that are associated. There is one more here. This is actually a slightly different version of the unit format than what I typically use, but it's generally organized with substructure, shell, interior, services, and so on. These are a good way, or a good representation of what I would call like a systems-based classification and functional-based classification, where we're not necessarily defining materials here, but we are defining the purpose and the function of them. So yeah, these are the classifications. Again, the version 2.0 here is really the only one we're using for associating properties. So yeah, that's kind of our baseline for organizing elements. Now let's actually go in here, and the first thing I want to begin with is let's actually switch things over from our existing plan to, well, we could go to a demo plan, but I often like having these filters here for isolating the demo and isolating the new. So let's go to the demo only here. And so this is really starting to, just by using our renovation filter, this is starting to really filter down the scope of work relating to just this one particular trade. So let's actually go in here now, and we can just grab let's just grab a door as an example, and we'll kind of start talking about the next level of information that we may want to be working with. So so that would be with our properties. Now I will say with this particular workflow, we kind of have two side-by-side identification systems running. You can actually see that we're not currently using our master format and our unit format for this particular door, but we do have those same values just loaded up as a property option set instead. So this is another way of kind of bypassing using classifications. There are some benefits of doing it this way. For one, you can actually export this out to Excel through the data validation and actually fill these drop down items in Excel, which can be really nice, but this also gives us different levels to work within. So we have openings, and then we have our doors and frames here. We have interior doors for our system, and once again, interior doors for our system. So, so I did want to just point out that identifications and classifications can be loaded into properties as well, and kind of used side by side if needed with the base classifications. So, all right. So because this is a demo scope here, let's kind of just start working our way down the list of some properties here. So you can see our cost estimate. So this is set up. We actually are not even pricing this. It's got a 0 here. Our unit of measurement, this is simply just a option set. We can see that it's part of a pricing package, but then we get down here to our cost code and our cost description. So these are a good example of just descriptions and IDs that we can tag, and here would be an expression that combines those two together into a cost item. We have different factors here, but let's dial in here down to our demolition section here. And so these are just some custom properties set up for our demolition costs. So here we can see we have a limited option set, but we're pricing this in this case by each, and we just have a plugged value of $100 per door to demolish here. So we also have some few other inputs that we could go ahead and plug in, but not 100% necessary all the time, only if you want to track that information. So, okay, so that is one element that is tagged for reporting. We took a look at a few of the properties there. Let's now check out our reporting structure here, which we can see over in our view map here under our trade reports. In this case, you can see that our first one is actually demolition here. You can see that we're also organizing a lot of these, in this case, by kind of like an abbreviated master format classification. So classifications are really useful not only for tagging model elements, but also for aligning our cost reports to those as well. And so let's just go and explore a little bit deeper into our criteria for this first report for demolition. So you can see as we read through this that we're looking for any 3D type, and our renovation status is to be demolished, and we are simply excluding any beam segment and any column segment and any zone. So our positive criteria is just looking for any type that is to be demolished that is not any of these. So pretty straightforward. You can see that we are listing our uniformat code, that's actually a property. We have our cost codes and descriptions and element types, demo costs and demo units, and then a number of different takeoff values. So, all right, let's go ahead and run this report now. Okay, that was quick. All right, so now we are seeing here all of our different groupings. So what's great about interactive schedules is we can turn on our headlines here to kind of break things up and organize things. So I always like using uniformat, which is a good organizer by kind of function and location here. So we can see anything under B is going to be part of an exterior wall system. Anything under C is going to be interiors related. Anything under D is going to be MEPs. Anything under E is the equipment or furnishings, and G is our site work type stuff. So, yeah, this makes it really easy to organize. We can always go in here and just like say, okay, where is this interior storefront window that's being demoed? Well, we can grab it in 3D by just hitting that little green button. It'll take us to it there, and then we can simply, look at it and check out the properties and double check what the cost is that we are associating to have things demoed. So, all right, that is just one line item here. We can always grab our headlines here as well if we want to kind of see all of our partitions. We can isolate them by hitting F5. And so once again, this is just like filtering through our model to try to pick up the model elements that we want to review and assign information to. So we can keep playing with this. We can go down to say like our lighting and branch wiring. Let's just grab Oh, let's see. I'm just looking at the counts here. So we have 22 of these. We have 60 of these. Let's just check and see what these are. So, all right. So these are, a number of different light fixtures that are being removed in this case. And okay, so let's switch things over now to kind of our next phase, which would be our new construction. So we can filter over to just the new elements, and we'll take a look at a few of these different scopes here as well. So I find that when you have renovation projects like this, using both an isolated demo and an isolated new is very useful for the elements that are remaining in place, and say maybe only get like a paint upgrade or a very minimal like rework to them. We still want to pay attention to those obviously as well, but that's likely only going to apply to a selected number of reports. So okay, so here we are with our new content being filtered through. Let's just come in here to this entry and let's just grab a single column here, and let's just kind of check out our properties for what we have. So I can see here that we are in this case taking our master format for structural steel, and we're also defining where this is falling under our unit format system, so based on our canopy. And then we can dive into our properties for, we can see that this is under metals, structural metal framing, roof construction, and canopies. You can see we're plugging a unit cost by a length unit of measurement here, and we're actually cranking up our quantity factors as well. So based on adding this, we can already add 20% to that for, say, like additional connections. So let's see how this looks on our structural metal framing report. So we'll just generate this, and we can see, okay, our front entry steel columns, well, there's a few for a bench, there's some steel rod assemblies, but we can grab any of these column headlines here and simply grab all the scopes and just highlight them in the model, make sure that we have them all, and then continue working from there. So, okay, so that's a few different styles of reports here. Certainly we can go through any of these different scopes and check out how things look. So we could go inspect like our carpet finish. Of course, that would fall under our flooring. So let's just generate our flooring report. All of these elements essentially play by the same rules, where if we look at our scheme settings, we're actually, this is a good example to look at. So this is an example of where we're looking again for our classification system that in this case is part of our properties. And we're also going in and looking for anything that may be using either one of these building materials. And of course, we're going through and just kind of excluding a lot of content also that we don't want to see. So, all right, so here we are. We can see it. We can go through. In this case, we have a lot of base on this project, so we can just highlight our headline value is one way that I always like just grabbing a chunk of this work to kind of analyze. And yeah, let's just have this pulled up. We can hit F5 is always really a useful way of just kind of filtering through to show only the selected elements. And all right, so there is our base, and just by assigning a few properties here to our finishes, our flooring, we're just defining what these are, and based on that, we can start running through the reports and calculating the cost. All right, so I want to make sure that we have enough time to go through both projects. So let's jump back to my slides here real quick and introduce some of the topics that we will cover with our other project file. So this is the residential design by Metrica. So we'll go in, we'll check out the classifications and properties. On this project, we're using the classifications as a much more integral part of the reporting process. We'll also talk about the quantity property mapping, which is really important, and as well as the internal cost calculations. So we'll take a look at some of those expressions for how this is being done. We'll also review some of the important inputs for base unit costs, as well as how we can build up composite unit costs and how we can adjust these things with factors, as well as get comps on our cost feedback. So, all right, let's jump over now to our sample project here. So yeah, you can see this is a residential design. And once again, let's just kind of start with our options and classification manager. So I just want to point out once again what we are using for this workflow. So yes, you can see it's version 2.0 once again. We can see master format 2018. So I believe this is the same version, just maybe named slightly different. And then our uniformat here. This is the version that I'm used to always working with. And you'll see here, if you actually look over on the right side of the screen under our cost reports, all of these reports are built on this second level here, which makes it really easy for setting up our criteria and taking elements to flow onto those reports. So, all right, let's take a look at now just another example. So let's just grab, like in this case, a sliding glass door, and let's do a little inspection here to see what classifications we are assigning. So obviously it's a sliding glass door based on master format, and this is a glazed door and entrance as part of our exterior enclosure here. So let's also go into our properties and just kind of check to see what's going on. So we can see we have a price, we have a takeoff value. In this case, because we're pricing by each, that's our how we're inputting our cost. That is going to determine that takeoff value should be 1 in this case. And so it's really easy to calculate our total cost in this case based off our unit cost multiplied by our takeoff value by equals our calculated cost. Now you might be asking, okay, 2,500 times 1 should be 2,500, right? Well, in this case, we're actually using a geographic modifier to modify all of our unit costs based off the fact that we want to add an extra little bit to this here. So if we zero this out, or if we actually go and set this back to a default expression here, it's not an expression, default value, you can see it goes back to 0.16. So that is our default. But if we set this over to just 1.00, and if we rerun our calculated cost here, it will be exactly what it was. So these are used as a way of just simply adding in either a quantity factor or a waste factor or whatever we want in order to adjust our calculated cost directly within here. So it's a pretty powerful feature of using just these numbers to multiply and to determine what our total will be. So, all right, that's just one example here. So that's a door in this case. Let's go and inspect our report where we are intending this to flow based off the fact that we have this set to B2031. So it should be under B20 would be kind of the headline. Let's check out our scheme settings here. So very simple criteria. All we're doing is looking for any 3D type that is in the branch of this classification. So anything underneath here will be rolled up into this report. And in this case, we're looking for anything that's new. So let's generate this. It may take just a minute because this exterior enclosure is now bringing through all of our exterior walls, all of our windows, all of our doors onto one individual report here that's going to give us what our overall exterior enclosure cost is on this particular project. Okay, so here we are. We can now see we have a lot of content flowing through here. So our organization here is generally set up by our uniformat. So we have our exterior wall construction. Let's pan down here a little bit. We'll turn on our schedule header, or we'll freeze it. Let's come down to the, okay, I can see we have some parapets. We have some sun control devices. And what's really cool about this schedule is the fact that we are running through unit cost by a takeoff value and a calculated cost. So a lot of stuff going on here in the background to determine what our takeoff is, as well as what our calculated cost is. So let's do a little bit more inspection on this to kind of understand where that's actually coming from. So in this case, we'll just grab one of these walls. I'm not sure where this is going to be, but we'll just grab a single wall. Looks like we've got like a little sliver of a wall here. I think we can go back and maybe grab something with a little more quantity, and so that will look a little better for an example. So, all right, so here we have a wall, and within this wall now, if we go inspect, for one, our classifications, you see we're set to wood siding and exterior wall construction. We also have up here, you can see that we actually have 0 as our unit cost, but down here under this section, we have this cost source, which is actually pulling from a different cost here. So if we see what our unit cost is variable, we can see that this is being calculated from another location. Well, where is that coming from? It's coming from all these details down here under our composite. So for our exterior finish, our furring, plywood, our wood stud framed wall, gypsum board, insulation, vapor barrier, and paint. So all these things working together to calculate up a total composite cost, and then that all can flow through. We have a takeoff value from this item, and we can see what our calculated cost is by simply multiplying this number by that number with any factors that we want to include into it. So that's how we can set up another scenario here where it's now starting to go into our composite breakdowns. So that's pretty cool as well. Let's take a look at kind of what's going on behind the scenes here in order to get those to calculate. So number one, we have a takeoff value. So this is an expression that really is going through and based off several, or actually this is just one formula for ifs. So if our unit equals a certain value, our unit is what we set up here, which defines how we measure it, then we can determine the outcome. If it's a length, then we find the length value divided by our units to convert it into a number. Our vertical linear feet would be our height, and so on. So you can see we have a lot of different variables here, and at the end of the day, we're multiplying by our quantity factors. So, okay, so where are those coming from? All those different quantity takeoffs? Well, they're actually coming from our takeoffs properties, which are being mapped from different design tools. So this is a wall, this is a column, this is a beam, I believe this is a railing, and we have all these different options. So as we go through each of these different quantity takeoffs, we can map different design tools to determine what those values are going to be. And then at the end of the day, we can go to our calculated cost, and we're simply just taking our takeoff value multiplied by our unit cost, which is a variable in this case, and then multiplied by any other factors. Our unit cost variable is just another build-up here, looking for whichever option set we pick and choose, whether it's a base unit cost or composite or detailed or one of these other variables. So this allows it all to work together and to calculate. So, all right. Yeah, we went through this timing here pretty quick. I know we are running short on time, so I want to wrap this up to make sure that we have time for questions. I'll keep these files open if anyone wants to ask a question relating to them. But yeah, let's jump back to our slides here, and I will hand it over back to Nathan for Q&A.
Thank you very much, John, for that great presentation. We've done well to be stuck talking to me in the 23rd hour of this event. I had a warning come up on my monitor about halfway through your session saying, 24 hours time for a break. My monitor brings up warnings every hour, so it was quite entertaining seeing that come up, despite the fact that we got so much time left with this. But let's hit the question straight away. So Lopez has put forward a question. I use component schedule and one object of GDL. I don't know if that's cryptic to you, or does that mean something to you at all?
Yeah, component schedules and GDL. That's an interesting concept. I think there was also a question or mention about using the older calculation database. So that's maybe that was the what he was referring to. But yeah, that's interesting. I'd love to see what he's talking about there with one object of GDL with component schedules. I usually use component schedules for like breaking out the materials within
systems and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Lopez, it'd be good if you maybe reach out to John to question him further about that maybe after the event, and could share concepts and methodologies. Dave, it's good to see you back, mate. I hope you had a chance to listen to that new Chemical Brothers single that they released overnight in the UK. Dave wants to know, what's the benefits of using classifications over property objects in the old Archicad database? So in other words, the old lists, which are progressively being kind of non-supported.
Yeah, so I mean, classifications are one part of it. The old Archicad classification or database, I think you're referring to the classification, sorry, the calculation engine. Yeah, I think that was just so kind of complicated and tough for people to get into and figure out. I tinkered around with it for a while and just kind of gave up on it once I really started understanding how IFC properties could work. And then once, properties came and classifications, it's just right there, so much more available and easier to use. And so many other benefits, throughout the rest of your project when you start implementing them. It just makes sense to go in that direction versus the older one that they're fading out, which I think was really only useful for listings and not necessarily so useful for interactive schedules.
Yeah, it wasn't an interactive schedule thing. I think there was actually a few older Archicad users that were doing some smart stuff with those lists, where they'd actually come up with, they'd code in certain outputs to then get smart outputs out of it. But I never got involved in that. I've always kind of reduced the amount of data I've kept in Archicad and used more outside of it. Lopez has kind of, I guess, answered David's question from his perspective in regards to, linking property objects to cost, with the new method actually pulling quantities more so. And the classification method was implemented for the interaction of IFC models. So classification was put in place, I think, more so originally to kind of make an easier way of mapping to IFC, and there was a need in the UK for having more than one classification applied to elements. So obviously an IFC classification alongside Uniclass, because that was what they had to deliver over there. And then the rationale, I think, behind Archicad properties is because a lot of once Graphisoft actually improved IFC properties, every man and his dog, everyone was starting to use IFC properties. But what you actually realise is that the amount of work that Archicad had to do in the background processing IFC properties was very resource heavy. So hence why they created Archicad properties and making it easier for people to get their hands on. We've got a comment here from Cheel. Hi John, are you going to use split in formulas in 5D after today's previous presentations? Do you see any good use from the methods that you saw from the other presenters today?
Yeah, so I think Eduardo was talking a lot about splitting classifications, and I do use this for primarily pulling out the IDs out of classifications. I find it really useful for, by taking elements with the classification that's of course an ID plus a description, to be able to pull out just the ID and use that as kind of like a link code, so that when you publish to Excel, you have like a nice clean compressed index number that you can then relate in formulas. So I do that all the time with splitting classifications ID out of the entire listing, to set that up. And you can actually just list just in the interactive schedules, it gives you the option of listing just the ID or the description. But by setting it up and splitting them into properties, it gives you that one extra layer of flexibility to be able to add like a .1 or .2 or a version to it when you use it as an expression. So yeah, lots of different ways of splitting things up, but definitely find that very useful.
There's so many ways to skin cats in Archicad. I think that's the biggest positive, but also can be what makes it so scary for some. Giovanna says, hi John, great presentation first of all, but also has a question for you. I imagine every so often you have to update all of those factors for the estimate to come out correctly. How far apart are these corrections applied to the template? So how often do you have to go in there and make those adjustments?
Yeah, so if you're using like a central template where you're storing all your different, favorites, so to speak, I'd probably go in and adjust them maybe every quarter or, maybe twice a year. But when you go to apply them to a specific project, you really want to be thinking about those factors and costs specific to how that project is getting built. So, I think any data that you assign from your library and like your standards as a starting point, but then ultimately when you're working on a project, you're going to want to massage those numbers and fine tune things a little bit more to really dial that in the estimate that you're trying to build.
Yeah, it's always going to change, isn't it, based upon location or demands of each trade or labour rates for each person and the like. But Francois is still going strong. Every time I see John show this, I'm just blown away. He makes it look and sound so simple. And in fact, this system does make it simple and consistently accurate. Absolutely brilliant. Well done. Thanks, John. Great always from Conmens. Marcus, thanks, John. Damien, amazing. Bruna, thank you, John. Thank you, John. Patrick, I believe building material and even surfaces can be used in Property Manager, like we saw in previous session 21. As a keynote system, I mean expressions, right? So you can do that, yes.
You can for some things, but you cannot currently run like one of the common component building material parameters I use is the projected skin area takeoff. Unfortunately, you can't add those values into expressions. There's other parts and pieces of components and surfaces you can definitely reference, but the quantity values, which are so critical to driving the cost calculations, unfortunately are not compatible just yet. So that's what I was trying to, mention. But yeah, certainly you can have other parts of those components or materials or surfaces in those expressions.
It's always a good wish list when it comes to properties and classifications. There's just so many things that once we see some opportunities, we start breaking it and wanting to do more with it. Gabriel asked the question, where do your unit costs come from? Do you keep a database in Excel at all for that?
So yes, I do keep a database in Excel. But I usually, there's a few different cost resource books that I'll go to. Here in the US, RS Means is a pretty good one. There's a few others as well. I know in some of the international markets, it can be tougher to find a cost book for your region, but yeah, I'll definitely, I have a few different cost books always on my desk that I reference. And yeah, ultimately building up an Excel database where you have a quick reference for different ranges of costs, on the low end to the high end, and an average is always a nice, quick reference to pull.
Find it always in the middle. Damien asked a really important question here. I think it's one that me as an architect, I refuse to provide quantities to anyone. Even an example the other week where one of the builders said, "Oh, can you just take off the square meterage of tiles?" And I said, "No, I don't want to do that, because then he'll just take that area and just apply whatever." I'm going, no, I want you to factor in the waste and all that, so you know how many tiles to it. I don't want to take responsibility of that. But Damien puts this good question forward. What QA systems do you put in place to make sure that your numbers are right?
So I'm constantly, it depends on what tools you're using. If you're using basic tools like walls and slabs and tools like that, design tools that are very easy to check and very, they always produce quantity outputs. Then I don't have to check them so much. But if I'm using objects and, morphs or other design tools and trying to produce a certain quantity, then it's always a matter of going in and checking to make sure that that's coming out right. So that's part of it. The quantity certainly is part of it. The other part of it is just making sure that you have everything captured. So there's different workflows you can add, like adding in graphical overrides and different audit reports to make sure that if you have something that's unassigned, that it will get flagged for you. So yeah, it's usually a matter of just, making sure that all the audit reports are clean. And then if you have any complex geometry or complex design methods, making sure that you go in and check the quantity outputs so that it's in line with what you're anticipating.
And Francois then kind of rounds it out, I guess, in terms of, that in terms of taking it to that next level. How would you describe a good model to base your costs from?
How would you describe a good model base to cost from?
So what are your expectations in a model that you'd want to see to enable you to generate a good estimate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's just so many different ways of looking at it.
the thing, I guess, I could almost answer that. One of the things that we have here in Australia is where the quantity surveyors actually say what they expect to have modelled and what they want in the model. So it gives them a starting point on saying, well, this is what I want to see in the model, and this is what I know you need to describe to me in words. Say, for example, you're not going to model skirting early on. And I'm hoping that wording is the terminology is similar for you in North America. But there'll be certain parts that you don't model, but you'll use a measure, or your price is based off of a system. So normally the quantity surveyor will say what their expectations are as a model development, and what they're expecting to see. That's how I would go about it myself.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to pay attention to that would make a model good is to really understand how you're using your different building materials, because building materials can be one of those criteria you add to an interactive schedule that's going to list anything that contains that building material. So if you're not paying attention to what building materials you're using in different composites or complex profiles or even in different objects, then you can start getting a lot of misreporting of scopes that you wouldn't intend to have show up. So building materials is definitely one area to pay attention to.
A good comment here from Michael. He's having a great deal of experience in cost systems. How long does it take the average user to get up to speed with the onboarding in terms of 5D as a process that you've described?
I think if you dedicate a few solid days to it, you can really make a big, impact in a short amount of time. But estimating is one of those things that, the more projects you do, the more you get under your belt, the more you kind of see the big picture of it. And you start getting these ranges in the back of your head. Okay, for a certain, scope of work, you expect it to fall somewhere within this particular range. So it's one of those things it's always a learning process, and it's never set in stone. Markets are always changing. There's always new, construction methods coming out. And so it's it's a lifelong learning process, the world of estimating.
Yeah, and Gabriel, I think, is trying to clarify their question. Actually, I meant, how are these unit costs actually brought into Archicad? So you bring them in using, Excel importer, or how you don't want to be sitting there filling in each individual type every time. What's the process that you're doing normally for that?
So I for the elements that I'm always reusing, starting a project with, I will fill out the costs in those, then use a property exchange, exporting to Excel, filling them out in Excel, and then bringing them back in. On a project by project basis, there are times where it's that's a quick, easy thing to do, is just export the properties out to Excel, fill them out, and then importing back in. There's different tools that I use in Excel, or different workflows for like kind of storing standards, what I call like below the line, and then using some like VLOOKUP formulas to populate any matching criteria as it relates to the elements. So there's some different tricks on how to kind of manage your database, your listings out, external to Archicad, and then just quickly apply them and use the property exchange for bringing them back in.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And BIM's asked, BIM A, how long does your BIM data determine cost information? So basically, what stage of the project are you performing these estimates? And what do you do regarding the cost information if the design changes?
So the first part of that, like, how long or at what point in the project do you start adding this in? The way that I always approach estimating is I would approach a budget and a breakdown really from the very beginning, even before you've done the design, so that it's kind of like a target right out of the gate of, what scopes you intend to, add into a project. That's a discussion between, the owner, what they want, the designer, and maybe the builder for a range, of what that project might look like. So set it up as a budget and do that manually just in Excel. And then as you start designing and your project progresses, you're constantly publishing out and checking against those initial targets. So it's always a process of setting it up first, your budget, and then checking as your design progresses and changes and modifies to make sure that you're within range there.
Now, John, we've got a couple extra questions, but we've run out of time. I'm wanting to keep this last session running on time because there's a lot of people that have stayed awake, Francois and Gerald. John, if you could answer those questions for them in the chat, it would be greatly appreciated. But thank you very much for participating and contributing to making Archintensive 2021 successful. Well done on coming on stage on the 23rd hour, and hopefully everyone will enjoy the last hour and enjoy my attempt at presenting some of these cool tools, and we can relax in the last hour. So thanks a lot, John, and I'll transfer everyone over to the last session.